I'm Richard Merzen with the Coast Guard Auxiliary Flotilla 2504, East Hartford, Connecticut. The auxiliary is participating in the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. My director of photography in this project is fellow auxiliarist Stephen Merzen. Today is October 20th, 2002. We are in Ledyard, Connecticut, the home of Commodore William Huling, age 75, who is a World War II and Korean War service veteran. He served in the United States Navy during both conflicts. Hi, Bill. How are you today?
Great. How are you, sir?
All right.
Fine. I understand you want me to tell you a little bit about what happened back near the end of World War near the end of World War II.
Yes, we'd be very
I was
interested.
going to a very small high school in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. The class was small in that 27 girls and 7 boys. All 7 of us boys wanted to get the heck out of there and get into the service to do our bit. So we were eager to go, and a fellow student, Fred McLaughlin, and I went into the Navy together. So we had the great thing of being together for all of boot camp. And since boot camp in those days was pretty severe, it was great to have a buddy through boot camp. Boot camp was in Bainbridge, Maryland, and for some reason, all the Navy people going into stewardship, which in those days was mostly black folks, did all their basic training there. So we were sort of a minority of white people going through boot camp there. We got it. The enormity of the situation started to hit home. You know, we were all eager and didn't know what we were facing, but our squadron leader was a veteran that had malaria, and every once in a while he'd end up with a high fever, the shakes, and laying in his bunk for 2 days while the malaria ground through him and then stopped again. And he was back the next day leading the platoon again. So when I speak about the enormity of the situation, you know, at 17 years old, you're really green. And one of the things that we did at boot camp was to stand watch in the laundry room so that no one would steal or laundry would be missing. And I guess that was a mid-watch I had one night, and I came upon a whole pile of laundry on the floor that obviously had been made up into a mattress, and some guy on watch used that to take a nap. And I happened to think, my God, this is wartime. You know, the guy could be shot for something like that. And I don't think any of us realized the enormity of what we were doing there. In other words, we were in the Navy. We were going to war.
Was discipline tough in Navy basic training?
Yes, it was. And there was a reason for it being tough, because they were taking green high school kids, 17 years old, and developing into a team that would follow orders. You know, it was nothing like nowadays of this concept, everybody doing his own thing. This was when the sergeant gave an order, you know, you hop too. And so it was going from an individual to a unit type situation. But it was strange things, and I guess I better not tell you that one, because that one is a little bit risky. But actually, when we got through boot camp, and I guess that there was a great deal of marching, a great deal of calisthenics exercises, that normal military type training. But the malaria-ridden drill instructor brought us around pretty quickly. He was the typical character that you see in the movies to develop people. When we left boot camp, I went to Great Lakes Naval Training Center. It's about 3 hours north of Chicago. Very, very cold, 4 foot of snow on the ground. And first thing they put me as MP at the bar room on the base. And I had to check everybody's ID card to make sure that they were 21, 18 or 21. I can't remember what the age was then. And this grizzled Marine sergeant came in. And I stopped him and asked to see his ID card. He thought sure I was just a Navy swabby giving him a hard time because his age was 33. And 17 years old, 33. I mean, I didn't have the slightest idea of how old the guy was. But I know I was going to have to watch out for him in the future because he thought I just was giving him one hell of a hard time. Let's see. I was at the electronic technician school there, which was a fairly long and complicated school. It was located right near Waukegan, Illinois, Jack Benny's birthplace. And there was a really, really nice USO in Waukegan, Illinois. So every chance we got to get off the base, we'd go to the USO, where there were hostesses there, they would dance with you. Just a nice hometown atmosphere. And I could never think of praises high enough of the USO. Back in those days, they were a military man's savior. I mean, a million miles from home and not knowing anybody, that really was great. After I left the school, I was just trying to think if there was anything interesting going on at the school. Mostly a lot of hard study. Went in as a seaman and got out as second-class petty officer. Then transferred to the DD 708 Holland R. Dixon in Newport, Rhode Island, and we got underway in the North Atlantic, and there is no place worse weather, I don't think, than the North Atlantic in the wintertime. It's a strange thing, I used to get seasick once every time we got underway, and I would never be seasick again on the whole trip. I don't know whether it's psychological or what it was, but it was great because once you got it over with, you didn't have to worry about it again. And the North Atlantic cooperated real well in at least getting seasick.
Did you make any stops while you were in the North Atlantic?
No, we were underway pretty much all the time. In fact, we refueled from a carrier. And we did a lot of, and I'm not sure, there was still a lot of merchant marine activity between Europe and the United States through the North Atlantic. And we did a lot of convoy escort, and also every once in a while there'd be an aircraft carrier, and every time aircraft landed or took off, the destroyer would be behind the carrier, so if they ditched, we would be able to pick them up quickly. In the North Atlantic, you don't last long in the water unless you get them out of the water pretty fast. I was really green because when I went aboard the ship, the captain was in the Combat Information Center where the radar screens are and all the plotters, and he asked me how the Sugarbaker 1 Charlie was doing. Well, I knew a radar that was SG-1B, but I never heard of Sugarbaker 1 Charlie. In school, they never ever used the terminology that way. So I felt very embarrassed. I didn't even know what the skipper was talking about, but he pointed to it, and then it was all right. I knew what he was talking about. But in school, they never used Sugarbaker for SG. Embarrassing little moments. In those days, the ET had a number of really important jobs. First of all, of course, was if the radar wasn't working, we could be in severe danger of collision. When the basic part of a radar was a transmitter type thing that fit and was the main generator of radar waves. It was top secret. So you had to get at least a lieutenant with a sidearm go with you while you took it out of the radar, and then you drop it in a big shell casing and then sealed it off, and then that was dropped in the ocean, so that that top secret main function, main piece of the radar would not be able to be found by the enemy. Let's see. See if I can't even read my own writing here, but okay, let's go here. Actually, I was discharged 2 years after my one-year extension by Congress, and I signed up in the Inactive Reserve. People that don't know anything about the reserve is the Inactive Reserve has no meetings. You have a certificate that you're in active reserve, and once a month you get a newsletter that tells about things of the reserve. And you feel, well, geez, this is great. I mean, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to sign up or anything. Then all of a sudden, the Korean conflict, and you get this letter. Report to Boston, Massachusetts. You've been recalled to active duty in the Navy. Well, that, when you're young and you're a kid, you sign up for reserve, you know, your second class rate, you don't want to lose that. So you're going to stay in the Inactive Reserve to protect that. But your protection is not too long, because in any conflict you get called back in. So I had only been married 6 months when I got called back into the Korean conflict. So, and in fact, the next time I saw my wife was almost a year later, when I was in Philadelphia, I think, and she took the train from Rhode Island down to Philadelphia, or actually I guess it was Norfolk, all the way to train to Norfolk, to have Christmas dinner with me. And they had a big Christmas dinner on the ship, and you could bring all your relatives on board. And but it's the first time I could see her again. Let's see what else there is.
So after you got reactivated, Bill, where did you went to, you were called to go to Boston. Where did you go from Boston?
Okay, from Boston, we picked up the porter. Actually, what we did is we went, and it was almost all reservists, and we went to Norfolk, or Newport News, I guess it was, and we took a destroyer out of mothballs. You know, it was all encased in plastic, and we took it out of mothballs, and then got all the equipment, electronic. Since I was an ET, we got all the electronic equipment running. And I was lucky in that I had been working on, at least on televisions, so I was still in about the electronic field. But some of the motomacs that were called back in, you know, they had run lunch carts, or they had done some some other job that was unrelated to what they did in the Navy, and they had a tough time. But it did prove that we could take a ship out of mothballs with reservists, and which was what they were out to do. We did go to Getmo for a shakedown cruise, and the heat down there, as soon as the heat hit all the electronic gear, then all the capacitors exploded. So we spent full time and more replacing all those capacitors and tried to keep the gear running. And then when we got back, they took all the electronic gear off. Everything that we worked so hard to finally make work, they took off and then put the latest version of electronics on board. And then back to Getmo, Cuba again, Getmo, Guantanamo, back to Cuba again for a shakedown cruise. One thing about the base at Guantanamo, it is very isolated from the nearest city, which was Guantanamo City. Sometimes on weekends you could get over there, but you had to take a motor whaleboat and go into the city and back. So they had all the facilities. They had horseback riding, they had swimming pools, they had bar rooms right on the base in Guantanamo. And I went ashore one night because we had been really working day and night, and got into a bar room there, and the next thing I remember, I was waking up in my bunk and the forecastle of the destroyer, and there was about 12 pair of shoes in the bunk with me. I understand I was singing some loud song, and everybody threw their shoes at me to try to try to wake me up or to make me shut up, really. So, but I was I didn't realize exactly what happened there until I was told very emphatically about things to do. You know, sleep on deck if you're gonna go out to the bar room. So, let's see. Apologize for looking at my notes, but it was a long time ago and I need something to remind me. Two pages already, yeah, 3. One thing we did do that had nothing to do with electronics is there was a small abandoned island down there near Cuba named Calibra, and all the gunnery exercises were held against that particular island, which was uninhabited. And unfortunately, when I went by the 5-inch guns, they were shelling Calibra, and I actually broke both eardrums from the concussion of the shells. I was very susceptible to that because when I was a kid I did a lot of diving, and in those days you never heard of scuba. It was just diving down free dives, and I actually broke both eardrums diving as a kid, so it was especially sensitive to the gunnery. I guess I'm running out of notes.
Now, when you left Cuba, did you went back to Newport News the second time around, or at
Yes.
some point you went?
Oh yeah, we went to, and I think I'm having trouble with what I told you before and what I've told you now. I don't remember what I did either time, but
right.
In any case, after we went back and we got all the new electronic gear on board, and then we brought it back and checked it all out, made sure it was running. At that particular point, we headed through the canal, and the ship went through the canal to the west coast, and then we went over to Korea. We went through a hurricane on the way. Actually, it was so rough that a radio transceiver in the ET shack actually broke loose and came right off the wall during the hurricane. That's when the destroyer, which is 378 foot long and about a 30-foot beam. It really rolls around. In fact, it's a strange thing. I've spent 5 cruises as underway quartermaster of the watch on the sailing ship Eagle, the Coast Guard square rigger. And she, below decks, is exactly like a destroyer. She also is 5 feet long, and only about 30 feet beam. And when the sail's on up, you know, she really rocks. When the sails are up, she stops rocking, she'll heels over to one side, but then she pitches. And I've been in the top bunk, and actually the bunk comes right out from under you, and you end up on the deck on the Eagle. Well, it's the same way on the destroyer, even though one is a sailing ship and one is a power ship. But interesting that of the comparison.
Right. What was your mission? Were you doing escorts when you went to, or?
On the destroyer,
Right.
There were 2 main jobs of the destroyer, and one of them was escort ship to all these merchant ships coming through, because even though the war was almost over in Germany, they were still German U-boats out. I don't know whether they were not in communications, but they were still sinking merchant ships, even though the war in Germany had
Right.
already surrendered.
Right. But I'm saying now, now going back or forward to Korea, what was the mission, your mission there?
Okay, in Korea, I was not in Korea very long because my mission was up, and they flew me home.
Mhm.
But we did 2 things in Korea. One was the inevitable plane guard for aircraft carriers, because if a plane taking off or landing went in the drink, we'd pick them up right away. And it was the same in the North Atlantic, only the North Atlantic was really ice cold, so you didn't have anywhere near as much time to rescue somebody.
Right.
So plane guard, and the other thing is that you'd lay off the coast of Korea with 5-inch guns, and they'd give you coordinates, and they'd fire 5-inch shells off at the targets in Korea. I wasn't doing that very long because, as I say, I left fairly soon. But it was really how I got started in electronics. Is the Navy taught me electronics, and then when I got out, I got into TV repair because of my experience with the electronics. And then from then on, the GI Bill, I went through the entire GI Bill in 1 or 2 semesters at Columbia University. My high school guidance instructor talked me into going to Columbia, and the cost of Columbia was such that you went through the whole GI Bill in the first year. That didn't last too good. I did go to school later. In fact, I went back to college 25 years out of high school and got my degree in production management, BS degree in production management.
Now, you know what I was going to ask, and I've always heard this, I don't know if it's true or not, having never been in the Navy. What about the food? How was the food when you were on the ship?
They say the best food is on submarines, but I think destroyers are a close second. You know, it's a relatively small crew, and they do really fine. You know, it's nothing. You talk to somebody in the Army who goes to sleep in a foxhole at night, and when he wakes up in the morning, he's in a half a foot of water, and there's K rations or cold food. That's one thing about the Navy, you know, you're well fed. I'm glad I was in the Navy. I guess I would have been happier in the Coast Guard from what I've learned in later life, but
What about, did you stop in any other interesting places, like when you were in the North Atlantic? Did you ever sight land, or were you always constantly
North Atlantic was, there was nothing there. I mean, you refueled from a carrier or some other large ship. Now, when I was in down in Guantanamo area, we stopped at a lot of places. We stopped at Kingston, Jamaica, all slums in the valley, but then on the high hill there's a big cross there up on the hill, and we had a chance to rent cars and go up and through the mountains, and it looked just like Arizona, you know, those big formations of rock, red rock. So Kingston, Jamaica, and a couple of places in Cuba, and we stopped at quite a few different places.
Let me ask you this, Bill. How do you feel like your service in the Navy affected your life afterwards?
Oh, I think it gave me direction for my whole life after that. When I got out of the service, I joined Dow Chemical here at Gales Ferry. I guess that was in '61, and I used my electronic background. I started out as an instrument man helper, and within 2 years I was an instrument man journeyman, from which I then was promoted to a general foreman, and eventually I made assistant superintendent, and then I won a scholarship from Dow to go back to 2 years to University of Connecticut to get my bachelor's degree. And then I spent the next 20 years troubleshooting different production plants that could not make enough product that we had demand for. And what we would do is go in there and make as many minor changes as we could to increase production while we were building a brand new plant. We got the brand new plant built, troubleshooted it, started it up, and then I went on to another plant doing the same thing. Same problems at every plant, different people. And I did that I moved 4 times in 11 years, and I moved every 5 years is the longest I ever was in any one place. I went up and down the East Coast, Ohio, Southern Ohio, Northern Ohio.
Do you think the Navy got you interested in joining the Coast Guard Auxiliary?
That's kind of a rough question. I have never thought of that before. When I transferred back here with Dow, my first assignment and my last assignment was in the same plant. Different job, but in the same plant, because I ran the plant when I came back, and I was an instrument man when I started the plant. But the main thing I think reason I joined the auxiliary is that I bought a boat, 25-foot Wellcraft, one owner only owned it a year, and I called to try to get a BS&S course. Well, local guy told me, he didn't know when he was going to have the next one. So I called the Power Squadron. The Power Squadron had a course, so I took the course. The day I completed the Power Squadron course, the guy from the Coast Guard Auxiliary called me and said, hey, we got a BS&S course. So I went to the BS&S course, and the two courses, the only difference I could find between the two courses was that the auxiliary used actual charts in doing the charting part of the course, and the Power Squadron had a handwritten chart that they had made. And other than that, the two courses were exactly alike. But in the BS&S course, a guy by the name of John Bucknavage, and I don't know whether you ever heard of John, but he has brought more people into the auxiliary than any other single person I know. He talked me into joining, and it was just in a great situation. And 3 months after I joined the auxiliary, I was an FSO-IS and an FSO MA, and I learned the basic, all the paperwork, all the materials available. And then, you know, vice flotilla commander, vice
Right.
captain,
But
captain.
you think that your sea experience, being through hurricanes and the North Atlantic, always kept an interest in boats. And,
I think that is a very big part of it, because terminology, you call a ship a she, a lot of other port and starboard,
Right.
green light on the starboard side, red light on the port side, all that terminology came from the Navy, so that, so many people, anyone that is not in the service because they come to the auxiliary, have a much more difficult time in learning because they don't have that military background.
Right.
Saluting, who you salute. Although it used to said, if it doesn't move, paint it, and if it moves, salute it, and you can keep out of trouble. But it's just so much easier and progressing through the auxiliary, the chain and the auxiliary, if you've had a military experience. I've always credited the Navy with allowing me to mature, allowing me to advance very quickly technically, and it's just...
So it really had
I've been
a very big effect on your life.
Oh yes, very much so.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing your recollections and participating in this very important historical project.
My pleasure, sir. I enjoyed it.
That's it.